Hopefully you can all see Nima's screen. I'm Dr. Cindy Lustig, and welcome to our workshop on applying to research opportunities, the nitty-gritty and what not to do. So today we'll be talking about some details of how to set up your application, some mistakes to avoid, and also be pointing you to some opportunities that you can use and hopefully be applying for. And some of them have deadlines that are coming up not too far away from now. If you have not yet, if this is your first Star Scholars Workshop, we'd appreciate if you could go ahead and fill out that pre-survey. You can either click the link or go ahead and scan that in with your phone on the QR code. And then we are almost at our last session here. This is our second to last session for the fall series. And then in just a couple weeks in December, we will have our Life of a Doctor, but Not That Kind. And that one is actually pretty interesting because we'll be talking about what kinds of careers you can have with a research degree in psychology that aren't necessarily just about being a professor. So come along and check that one out as well.
All right, so I'm going to get us started. Like Dr. Lustig said, today we're talking about research opportunities, giving you some pointers, how to avoid some of the rookie mistakes that aren't super widely talked about. So this talk today is what we tend to refer to as like the hidden curriculum, because a lot of this stuff is kind of shared, not in like super public settings, like it's not in a course that you can easily find other than hopefully stars. And today our goal is to help unhide this hidden curriculum for you. And like Dr. Lustig said, some of the deadlines are actually coming up relatively soon. So it might be a good idea to write down any opportunities that you're particularly interested in. Also, I'm Nima. Sorry, I didn't say that at the start. Okay, there's that QR code one more time. If you want to scan that, if this is your first STARS workshop. I also did want to let you guys know that we do have a YouTube channel, Psych SAA. You can find some past recordings of workshops on there. So if this is your first time attending a STARS workshop, you can get some additional information from the YouTube as well.
Yeah, and actually, Nima, I'm going to jump in here real quick as well. So I think actually this link in QR code might take you to a recording of an earlier presentation, because in some ways this is a part 2 from our earlier presentation. So if you missed that one, we did talk in more generally earlier in the semester about how to figure out what kind of research program you might be interested in, how to help get yourself prepared for it, and also if you are not able to successfully find a position, what you can do to sort of set yourself up to be in a position, to be a stronger candidate the next time around. We're going to hit some of those same issues today as well, in case you missed that session. But just as a reference, if you want to go more detail into those topics, we have this all up on YouTube, and it's just available for you whenever you're ready for it.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Sure, no problem.
Okay, let's get going here. So here are some brief objectives of what we're trying to accomplish with you today. We want to go over different ways that you can get involved in research in your area by contacting people on your own. We also want to share some more opportunities that are more widely available to people that you can consider applying to, both here at the University of Michigan and elsewhere. We'll go over different types of research assistant positions, and we will walk you through the typical process of getting an RA position. So including things like how you reach out for the first time, how to format a resume or a CV in a way that can hopefully get some eyes on it. Lastly, we do want to end with some acknowledgement of what happens if you don't get a research opportunity that you were particularly excited for. And that might be especially relevant in our current climate where a lot of research opportunities and fundings have been cut. So it's just a good thing to touch on because it is part of the application process to also go through rejection every now and then. So this is what we're going to try to cover for you guys today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my own journey to getting to my PhD program. So I'm currently a 5th-year doc student in the clinical science program at the University of Michigan. This is like an overview of the timeline that I have, and I want to start with a huge disclaimer that I did not take a gap year, and I highly, highly do not recommend doing that. I feel like I'm living proof of why you probably should take a gap year, and you'll probably get to know more about that both today, and hopefully in future STARS workshops if you guys keep joining us. But basically, my journey was I actually did my undergrad at U of M, and I had the opportunity to join in a research lab as an undergraduate research assistant. And I was just lucky because the faculty member whose lab I joined was collaborating with several other faculty members. And because I joined in my sophomore year, over the years, I started to get involved in several research labs through my faculty's collaborations. If my faculty did not have those collaborations, I think I would have gotten a fraction of the research experience I had actually ended up with. So a lot of it was just timing and kind of luck of when I managed to get in the lab based on the projects that they were doing. So I did a lot of work through those research labs throughout my undergrad experience. I also did a summer research program at U of M. It was called M Cubed. I don't think that's happening as much anymore, but there are other summer research programs at UMich and just across the country that I've heard people apply to. I did do an honors thesis my senior year, and that was a really helpful experience that I'm happy to speak more about if people are interested in. It's a good way of getting experience of writing your own publication, of like coming up with a research question and following it through from start to finish. And then finally, yeah, I applied for my PhD. I managed to get in. Again, I don't really recommend it. I think that having some experience outside of undergrad, one, it's professionally really smart. It helps you develop into a graduate student who is more ready to kind of hit the ground running. I had a lot of growth and development. I had to squeeze into my first and second year when you're also doing a lot of coursework and all these other requirements. So I think taking a few years off in between is really helpful for professional development. I also think it's just good for personal development, in my opinion. I think it helps you kind of turn into a person a little bit more, turn into an adult before you then come back to graduate school. So I'm happy to talk to anyone if this is something that like you're concerned about. I've talked to a lot of undergrad students who feel that pressure to go straight through. I know I felt that pressure to go straight through. And as someone who did, I'm now on the other side being like, yeah, I really think you should take gap years. So hopefully that means something. But we'll keep talking about gap years and all that as these workshops progress. That being said, my path, my journey is just one example of getting to graduate school. There are so many diverse paths and stories that you'll hear as you meet more of the STARS mentors and you get to talk to more faculty. There is no single path to getting to graduate school. First, just different experiences happen. Life also just kind of happens with all the things going on right now in our world. It also kind of restricts like how seamless your path might be. So I just wanted to normalize, like, there's no formula really to get in. The goal is to just get experience, know what you want to do, have that passion, have that background knowledge to succeed in whatever program you end up pursuing. Okay, so my path is just one example. But we're going to focus now on what all of you can do if you are interested in finding research opportunities at the current stage that you are at. Okay, so first, let's go back to the basics and let's start thinking about where does research even happen? We want to be very concrete and specific about this because psychology research can look very diverse. There's a lot of different examples of it, and it's important to know where to look so that you can start looking. Primarily, psychology research happens at psych departments in different colleges and universities. But that being said, psychology is such a broad field and it branches into so many other domains that it's also very possible to get that kind of experience in psych research through other fields like social work, political science, public policy, public health. A lot of these domains and areas that might sound different are actually doing a lot of psychology-based work. And just as an example, in the past year or so, I've actually spent more time at the School of Social Work than I have at the Department of Psychology, because a lot of the research that I do has to do with like community-based stuff and like working with different underserved communities to make mental health care more accessible. And a lot of that work is happening in schools, social work and public health. So be open-minded, think diversely about where you're going to apply and where you're going to look. The other thing to consider is that research is performed outside of academia too. So you don't have to restrict yourself to just colleges and universities. You can start to think a little bit more broadly into governmental agencies. We can think about like what is available there right now. There are think tanks, private companies, private firms that are doing a lot of research in general. And right now, a lot of mental health-based research or psychology research as well. Okay, so that's one thing. Those are the general institutions where you can, oh, I'm sorry, there you go. Those are the general institutions where a lot of this work is being done. But when you take it one layer deeper, there's a lot of psych research that happens in lab settings, and that happens in our very own East Hall too. So there are a lot of animal-based labs, but a lot of psych research also just happens in like an office with computers. I know some labs who go to school settings and they work with kids. There are some labs at our university that have kind of like created, like if you know Ashley Gearhart, I know she teaches 270 sometimes for undergrads. So you might have taken her class. She's created like a fast food restaurant that people come and she does like experiments there. So there's a lot of different settings. And with psychology as well, we can have people come into our lab, come into our office, but we can also go out to the community. So that's where you see people going to schools. You might see people going to hospitals, prisons, foster homes. It can be very diverse. So both a good thing and can sometimes make it hard to know where to look. But the main point here is that there are a lot of different places you can find opportunities for psychology related research. So maybe just consider what kind of research you would want to do and where. Okay, so that's a little bit about where research is happening. And in each of those settings, there are a number of positions that you may qualify for. So if you're thinking about the University of Michigan, you might be aware that there are some labs that you can join for academic credit, and you can do it as like an independent research course. There is a specific number for it, and my brain is saying 326, but that is right. Okay, great. That's the one that you enroll in when you're essentially telling the school, I'm doing research, and it's qualifying for some of your credit hours. And then your faculty member or your PI of the lab or the graduate student that you're working under will grade you every semester to give you credit for that. So that's one option, is you can be like an undergraduate RA who's enrolled for course credit. Sometimes you're also able to join a lab as a work study student. And that might make it easier for you to almost see that research involvement as somewhat of a part-time job. Hopefully it'll help you meet some of your financial needs. There are also some labs that have funding to hire research assistants, and that's an important thing to ask about if it's something you're really concerned about. If you know that you need some income when you start applying, make sure you have that in your questions so you know that you can get your needs met by working there as well. Other programs offer internships, so that can be something that you do over the summer. I've had research assistants of mine who have gone to other schools over the summer for a summer internship. Sometimes they're paid, sometimes they're not. So it's another important thing to inquire about if having an income is something that's important to you during those months. So just to debrief a little bit, what we've said so far is course credit, work study, maybe having some kind of like payment through the lab's funding, and then internships that might not be paid. The other big chunk of research assistant jobs are on a volunteer basis, where you just give your free time to the lab. It's a great way to get experience. It does kind of chip into your free time a little bit. A lot of research assistants end up being like on a volunteer basis at some point in their time in their lab. So that's another important thing to consider. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. I'll get better about actually showing you these while I talk.
Okay, thanks so much, Nima. I am going to talk a little bit about some more specific programs, just to point you guys to them and let you know what's going to be involved. And so some of these that are on this slide, they are specific to Michigan, and they also at least can be partially through psychology. And so, and some of these are for folks who are here at Michigan, and then for some of these are for if you are at another institution and you want to come visit us for a summer and come and do research here. So most of you, if you are at Michigan, have probably heard of the Undergraduate Research Opportunities Program. There are parallel programs at many other universities. This one is great because you can do it either for credit or you can do it for work study. And so if you do have that as part of your financial aid package, that is very helpful to be able to do that. And they also give you a lot of helpful training. There's workshops that you can apply for. They sort of help to source you with a lab as well. So that one's nice because it provides a lot of support for you. Undergraduate independent study. So Nima mentioned one option for that, and I think it's probably the most popular here at Michigan, which is Psych 326. There are a couple others too. So there is Psych 331, where there's a class attached to it, and that's especially for people who are more interested in the more biopsychology and neuroscience aspects of things. And there's a couple others, like if you just want to write a paper, there's some options there too. And so in that case, what you're going to want to do is talk to a faculty. It will usually be somebody that you may have developed some relationship with, and you'll have kind of outlined a project with them about what it is that you're going to work on. And so in those cases, they're often a bit more independent, especially once you get past the 326 level, than UROP is. UROP is often sort of like the very beginning stages in your first or second year. The Summer Research Opportunities Program, they do take some Michigan students and send them off elsewhere. But in many cases, that is a way for if you are at another institution and you want to come and visit Michigan and work here for a summer, then that is a really great program. It also gives you classes on the GRE, and they do provide you with housing and a food stipend as well. It's a really intensive program, so you are expected to be in the lab. You're in the lab, I think, for 8 weeks, and you are expected to be there for about 40 hours during those 8 weeks. So if you have something where you've talked with a professor and they have a project for you, it's a great way to really knock something out quickly. So I had a great student from UC Davis visiting my lab this summer, and she actually helped to set up our TikTok study. So we're right now taking a look and seeing how it is viewing TikTok right before you do an attention task. What parts of your attention does that influence? And is it different from looking at a book? And she was able to, because she came and really focused on that for a week, she was able to set all that up, and she's still involved in it, which is fun. There is the Student Opportunities for AIDS and HIV Research, which is SOAR. There are some psych faculty members that are involved with this. There are also some over at the med school. This is an interesting one because it's a 2-year program, so that you need to apply at the beginning of your junior year. And then the idea is that they really want to give you this intensive research experience and really build you up to be a junior expert with them. Another really great one is M-Spiced. And that one, if you are a Michigan student, you do it throughout the academic year and can also do the summer. But I believe that they also have a summer program that is just for folks who are coming from outside too. And that is one for if you are particularly interested in child development and cognition. That's a really great program to be in as well. There are a couple others. So as Nima mentioned, not all of them here at Michigan that are relevant are necessarily within the psych program. So another one that I'm familiar with is that our undergraduate program in neuroscience actually has 2 summer programs that they run. And so neuro actually is full-time summer and part-time academic year. So that would be for people who are here at Michigan. And then Siren is for if you're coming from outside Michigan. And again, you want to get that intensive research opportunity. And then there's nationwide opportunities. So again, SROP is not just for Michigan. It's all throughout basically all of the universities that are part of the Big Ten, or I guess it's now technically the Big 11. They have not set their due date yet. So if there is a school that you're interested in applying to and that they are one of the schools that does your app, keep an eye on their application page. It should be opening up sometime in December. NSF does research experiences for undergraduates. Search on Google, look for REU sort of in a topic that you're interested in or at a university that you're interested in working with. And a lot of times they will advertise as well. So these are ones that the National Science Foundation sponsors. Again, usually to bring students who are from smaller schools that maybe don't have a lot of research infrastructure, like a Michigan, like a UC San Diego, and then to give you the chance to be at a place where it has the resources and you can get that kind of exposure in a bigger lab. The American Psychological Association, it has a nice list of undergraduate research opportunities. Again, just Google it and that will pop back up right up for you. And then another great resource, psychresearchlist.com. It's a little bit slanted towards social psychology, but it's all kinds of psychology research positions, graduate student positions. If you're in that spot where you're applying for graduate school, jobs, it's just generally kind of like a good place to look for any kind of position that you might be interested in. And they also have a lot of great research resources up on there about how to prepare your application, what to expect in the interview, and so on. So I really encourage you to check that website out. Two others that I highlighted in part because I just got the emails about them today. So one of them is the RISE program. And so this is a residential internship for independent seniors, undergrads, even recent high school grads, even recent college grads. And they are particularly interested in students who either from an Indigenous background themselves or who are interested in studying those kinds of issues. SPUR is another program. It's very similar to SROP. They just have their own name because they're not part of the Big Ten. And so again, take a look at the universities and the programs that you might want to work with and see when they may have their deadlines. Again, most of the ones that I've been able to find, it looks mostly towards the end of January. And so that's the other thing that I did want to point out too, is that if you are looking for a summer position, spending your Thanksgiving taking a look at the applications and taking a look at the deadlines is probably a good idea. If you wait until March or so, you may be too late. So you did a great thing by deciding to come today and find out about these different kinds of programs. And we'll also send you a link to these slides at the end so that way you can take a look up and be able to look up some of these as well. We also have a link, and again, this will be in the slides. This is a little bit older now, so not all of these may be completely up to date. It was put together by one of our STAR mentors a couple of years ago, but this lists basically everything that they could find for a summer research program. And as Nima mentioned, at the moment, as you may have heard, funding for research is in a slightly precarious position at the moment. And so not all of these will necessarily be going on, but a lot of the positions that had been canceled last year seem to be coming back this year. Either because of federal government funding or in some cases they've been able to find private foundations to fund them. So I would say, it's going to be tough and competitive, but there is stuff out there, and definitely do your best, find the places that look like a good fit for you and go ahead and put in your application. You don't win the lottery if you don't buy the ticket. So.
All right. So hopefully you guys wrote down some important notes from all the different opportunities that Dr. Lustig just shared with you. We're going to switch gears a little bit and now talk more about how you can go about looking for a position within your own university. So whether you're at UMich or elsewhere, how you get in contact with labs and hopefully get a position there. Okay, steps in the process. The very first thing that we would like you to do is really try to clearly define what you're interested in and what goal you have for your research experience. It can be as broad as just, I want to learn what it's like to be in a research lab. It can be very specific and more about, I want to gain research experience in this very specific field or with this specific question I have. But start by defining what you're interested in. Hopefully, that will then help you narrow down your options based on which opportunities are a good fit for your interests or goals. And once you decide on what options you're interested in, the next step would be to actually express interest in those positions and start applying. So let's go back to step one. And let's think about what it looks like to define your interests and goals. I'm going to say again something we said earlier, that no two paths are alike. There are a lot of different ways you can go with your research experience, especially early on when you're in undergrad. So think about what your ultimate goal is for your research experience. Do you want to pursue graduate school eventually? Do you think you want to be more of an instructor, teach classes? Do you want to do just research? Do you like working with people, animals? Are you interested in social psychology, developmental? There are a lot of different areas to explore here. And exploring some of those areas independently by reading journal articles or talking to people in that field can help you get an idea of what is sparking your interest. Another good thing to do is to look back at the classes you've taken so far, or even look through the course catalog now that that should be out. And just look at what classes spark your interest. Which ones are you like, ooh, I would actually want to take that. And then you can think about what field that class is in, and that might help you narrow down your focus a bit too. Volunteer work is another good one to think of, especially in psychology research. You're doing a lot of work with humans and people. So it's helpful to think about what kind of interactions you've enjoyed doing already. Then we want to think about whether your goals are clear or a little bit fuzzy right now. It's totally normal to have fuzzy goals, especially at the beginning and also throughout the process, because you could start in a lab with a super clear goal, not love the work you're doing, and then that goal gets a little bit fuzzy again. It's helpful to always revisit your goals and think about what you want to do and what you're interested in. So on that note, let's think about whether our goals are clear or unclear. Okay, so some people might feel like they have very clear goals. They know exactly what kind of area of research they're interested in. They have these like certain populations of interest that they keep coming back to. You might be able to then find labs that line up with those specific goals or areas of interest. And then your goals can be more specific and like building skills that might be really relevant for that area of research. For example, I have friends in my program who do a lot of brain related research. So they have a lot of skills and experience with fMRIs and brain imaging and all that stuff. I don't know how to do any of that because that's not related to my goals. So once you get like very clear, narrow goals, you can start extending what kind of skills you want to learn related to that specific goal that you have. Eventually, once you feel like you've got all these specific goals, you know exactly what you want to do, it might lead you to applying to a PhD program in a specific field. However, oftentimes what's even more likely, especially in college, is to have like little fuzzy goals. You know that you like psychology, you know that you want to do research, but you're not exactly sure which field, which area, what population. So that in itself creates a goal, right? It might just be exposure. I just want to see. I want to see what this lab is like. I want to see what research is like. I want to see if I even like it. That in itself is a goal. But the difference is that for this set of goals on the left, this person might look for very specific opportunities that align with their ultimate graduate school goal or their specific interest in developmental psychology, because they know that like this is where I want to be. For this person on the right, it might just be trying out different research opportunities or joining programs or seminars like this because you want to increase your exposure to different types of research or different opportunities in the field. So both can encourage and motivate your behavior. It might influence what you're looking for a little bit more. So if you do find yourself leaning more towards that unclear category where you're not entirely sure what you want to do or what kind of lab you want to get involved in, I would encourage you to start looking for resources that might help you explore your interests a little bit more. So you can look for books. They have a lot of different books, TED Talks, YouTube videos. Explore, see what's out there, see what sparks your interest, what energizes you. There are also a lot of online worksheets that you can use to explore your own interests. So we have a little link here that you can access once we send out the slides. But I would encourage you to see what's out there. There are a lot of online resources that can help you understand like what a day in the life of a researcher looks like, or a day in the life of a psychiatric nurse. Like there are a lot of options out there. So just explore, and that might help your goals become a little bit more clear. So let's say we've got our goals figured out. We know what we want to do. And now we're on to the next step where we need to start narrowing down our options. One of the biggest things you can do to narrow down your options is assess fit for each opportunity you're looking at. So if we have our goals, each time you're evaluating an opportunity that's coming up, these are some things that you might consider. First, you might consider what the lab is actually doing, what kind of experiences or training you might get at that research lab or at that program. Do those experiences or opportunities align with the goals that you have set for yourself? Who would your primary mentor or supervisor be? If one of your goals is to work super closely with a faculty member, and the lab that you're applying to has a large network of like graduate students, lab managers, and you know that it might be hard to connect with a faculty member, that's something to consider. What would be the primary duties? What's the time commitment? Do you have the bandwidth for that with all of your other responsibilities? You can also ask about culture. This is a really good thing to ask about when you get invited for interviews. Just ask, like, what are the former undergraduate research assistants up to now? Where are they at? Are they working? Are they in graduate school? Are they in contact? Do they write letters of recommendation? How do they help train the undergrad RAs? Do they have like professional development opportunities? Do they have journal clubs to help RAs learn about the field or about the research? And then finally, mentorship. If you don't have a super clear goal on like, I want to get mentored by a faculty member or I want to get mentored by a graduate student, regardless, it's important to know who you would be working with or who would be supervising your work. Because that can tell you, am I going to get supervised by potentially like a lab manager, maybe a senior RA? Will it be graduate students, or is it going to be the faculty member who's overseeing my work? Okay, so this is a good way to start narrowing down your options or just some criteria to put into your list of opportunities so you can evaluate them further. So now let's say we've got our list of options. We know where we're applying. Now, who do we apply to? Who do we email? A very common mistake is a lot of people will contact the PI or like the faculty member of the lab. And although it seems natural and logical, the issue is that faculty members get a lot of emails, and I don't want to risk your email getting lost in the influx of emails that they're getting. Additionally, a lot of these labs are kind of like small businesses of their own. Like they've got a lot of moving parts, they've got a lot of managers, and oftentimes they will have a person in the lab whose job it is to review, interview all the undergrads applying to be in the lab. So you want to make sure you're contacting the right person. So we included this picture here. This is Dr. Jill Becker's lab. She's in biopsych. And you can see Dr. Becker's right here. All these other people are in Dr. Becker's lab. So this group of people, it's everything from like graduate students, lab managers, postdocs, undergrad research assistants. So Dr. Becker's probably managing like all of these people. So it's probably hard for her to then also review interested applicants' CVs and all that stuff. So you just want to make sure that you're contacting the right people. Oftentimes, that is going to be a lab manager because lab managers are exactly what it sounds like. They're kind of like the manager of the little business. They coordinate everything, they know all the projects going on, they might be in charge of the different teams, they might know which teams need RAs. So they're a pretty safe bet. Another safer bet is a graduate student because they're probably involved in several projects within the lab. They might be the ones who are directly recruiting undergraduate RAs. So they might have a vested interest in looking through the applications and actually taking someone on. Kind of similarly, postdocs are also a good bet because they typically are also involved in a couple different projects in the lab. They're really good mentors because they've gotten through graduate school now. They're on the other side, so they have a wealth of experience in that point. And on top of that, because they aren't quite at the faculty level yet, they have a little bit more bandwidth to actually mentor students. And it's also good practice and training for them, especially if they're trying to get to a faculty position. And then finally, the faculty and the principal investigator, like I said, lots of emails, typically the busiest person in that lab. They're in charge of everyone. And the PIs are also in charge of their graduate students' degree progress. So there's a lot of things like that the faculty member is kind of responsible for and in charge of that can make it difficult for them to be super responsive to applicants' emails. So this is kind of the order in which you might think about emailing people. Try to find a lab manager first. If not, maybe a grad student. If not, then a postdoc. Then, if all else fails, a faculty member. Another safe bet is to find the website for each lab. And most of the time, labs will have like a little tab on their website that says like for applicants or for research assistants or something, and you can click on that. And sometimes they will tell you exactly who to email. Like they will say, if interested, please email this person. So just make sure you do your research on the lab too, once you think you're interested in applying there. Oh, yes, perfect. So this this link actually goes directly to a link that lists all these research labs at U of M in the psych department. So this is a really quick and easy way to get directly to the lab websites. A lot of the times you can also look up the faculty member or like the name of the lab and it should pop up, but this link is a safe bet. All right, next, we know who to email. Now, what do we say? Here's a brief outline of what to say when you're emailing someone in a research lab. The first thing, a golden rule, is try to be as concise as you can. This is just you expressing interest. This is you saying, hey, I would like to join your lab. Is there a position available? So don't throw a whole application in here quite yet. Just express your interest and be clear and tell them what you're capable of giving them, like how much you want to be involved in their work, why you're interested in their work. Make sure you address a specific person and do include their title. An important note is that graduate students are not doctors yet. So graduate students will be a Mr. or a Miss or a Mrs. Postdocs and PIs will be doctor. And then just like the normal stuff we usually talk about with emails, try to be formal, try to be concise, be clear in what you're saying. And I'm actually going to show you an example next so we can talk more in depth. Okay, so here's one email. Hello, Dr. Block. I am sophomore majoring in psychology with a minor in biological sciences. I read about your ACT lab and I think that social desirability experiment on your website is very interesting. Are you currently accepting RAs? Please let me know the process involved with getting involved in your lab. I've attached my resume for your convenience. Thank you, your name. So as you'll notice, this email, this example we've given you here, it hits on all the points that I told you on the previous slide, right? It's pretty concise. It's also clear. We know exactly who you're addressing, Dr. Block. You're also kind of showing Dr. Block that you've done your research on their lab, you know what they're doing, and you're making a very clear ask. Are you currently accepting RAs? Another email here is, hi, Sam. I've heard that it's good to get involved in research for anyone who might want to go to medical school. I'm a sophomore and I found your lab information through the psychology website. Can you tell me about your research? Do you think it's a worthwhile lab for undergraduates? Okay, so this one has a couple issues. First, the writer uses a first name for the recipient. So you see it says directly to Sam. We don't know if Sam is a graduate student, a postdoc, a faculty member. We also see some typos. Another big red flag here is that they are asking they're asking Sam to educate them and tell them if the lab is worthwhile. That will typically turn off almost everyone who gets that email. Because how you want to approach this is you want to approach this as, I know I'm a good fit for your lab. Would you please look through my materials, or would you consider me for the role in your lab? Rather than asking the graduate student, the lab manager, the PI to like sell the lab and be like, should I join? Okay, so it's kind of like a respect thing. It's trying to make clear to the person that I've done my research. I know what this is about. All I'm asking is, do you have a position available? And are there any specific steps that you want me to take to apply for that position? Okay, does anyone have any questions on this slide? Yeah, Anushka?
Hi, yeah, I was just curious. So maybe I was under the wrong impression previously, but I would have thought that you would need to include more information on your own background and experience and why you're interested in the lab in an email like this. So could you maybe clarify more about why I'm wrong or like why this email should be more succinct?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I'm going to say that my answer is that it depends on the situation. So, for example, if you got an email that was like blasted to all the undergrads in psych that said, hey, my lab is hiring a new research assistant, like applications can be sent to this email, then there's a slightly different process where you might explain, like, I think I'm a really good fit for this because I have this experience. This is what I would want to do in your lab. Here is my CV. This email is just expressing interest. This is you kind of testing the waters, seeing, is there even a position available? And kind of on that note, thank you for priming me, Anushka. Even in this email, when you're expressing interest, even then, we do recommend that you add a resume or a CV. We just recommend not going super in depth into like, I'm a great fit for this lab. This is what I can offer, until you know for sure that there is a position for you that might be available. I don't want you guys to waste your time like writing out all these like beautiful emails for labs that might not have any openings for research assistants. So it's kind of you respecting your own time, you respecting their time. This is you just testing the water, taking the temperature. Do you guys have room for me in your lab? If they say yes, they will likely give you either an application that you fill out formally and you answer questions that kind of get to exactly what you said, like, why are you a good fit for this lab? What skills do you bring? Or if they're saying, yes, we are taking applications, please just send your CV and tell us a little bit about yourself, then in that email, you can go a little bit more in depth. Dr. Leslie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'll just pipe in as a faculty member and sort of give you the perspective on that. So I would say, like, if you are applying, so let's say you're applying through Europe or SROP and the lab is listed as one that is accepting students through there, then, as Nima was saying, that would be like where you would be a little bit more detailed, because now, you're sort of, that you're sort of in competition with other people who are applying for that lab. And so you're trying to make your application and, stand out a little bit. Even then, you're not going to go too long. You're going to, sort of say like, I'm really interested in your lab's research on this. If there was a project description in the ad, like you would mention something about that. If you have any particular skills, and then you would just say, that you might mention, like, oh, I noticed your lab uses R for analysis. I've taken a class in that. I'd be really interested to grow my skills on that further. And then, attaching your CV would be great. If it is just, like the cold, like I am just, the lab looks really interesting, I think that initial email is fine, because I can confirm I get 5 of these emails a week. And it's to the point where I literally have a template response, that I send to folks if we aren't looking for people, just kind of saying, sorry, we're not looking, here's some resources, that you can use to, try to help you as you're looking for positions. So yeah, include enough about yourself to pique interest, but unless you know that people are looking for a lab, you don't need to labor over it at the beginning.
Definitely. And I'll also add, I've gotten a few emails from undergrads who are interested in an RA position, and sometimes they'll have a longer expressing interest email where they specifically mention projects that they're interested in, but we aren't looking for research assistants on those projects, but we might be looking for them on other projects. So you also don't want to go into it blind, right? Like you need a little bit more information. So if you don't know if a lab is taking students or anything, if you emailed me with that expressing interest email, I'd probably be like, yeah, like we are hiring for my like the ACV project, which is my dissertation. Like, please send your CV and whatever. And then you guys could go on and look up what my dissertation is, see if it's a good fit for you, see if it aligns, and then you can draft another email accordingly. It is kind of confusing though. So if you guys have more questions about that, we can go over it at the end. To what we were saying earlier, even in your expressing interest email, it's helpful to include a resume or a CV, just something so that the recipient of your email has something to learn a little bit more about you and get a sense of who you are and what you've gotten experience in so far. It does not have to be a CV yet. If you have a resume, that's fine too. The most important thing is to just highlight whatever skills and experience you think makes you a good candidate for the position you're interested in. You'll notice that there is quite a bit of overlap between the resume and the CV. And again, the most important thing is these skills, the core competencies, the experience you have. You go over that in your resume with professional experience. On your CV, that might look more like research experience or service work you've gotten. You've got awards on both of them. So on both, you're going over relevant experiences you have that might have given you skills that makes you a good candidate. So as long as you hit these bullet points on either your resume or on your CV, it's a pretty good attachment to have on that first email expressing interest.
Hi, I have another question.
Yeah, go for it.
So I've noticed that on a lot of websites that are attached to these research labs, they already have a pre-existing form for applicants to fill out. Would it be a good idea to still send an expressed interest email, or should I just go ahead and start applying to those forms?
My gut, and I'll turn it over to you too, Cindy. My gut is saying that if the application is on the website, I would fill out that application and attach it to the email and say like, hi, I found this application on your website. If you're taking applicants, like I've included my application in my CV below. And my reason for saying that is when I was in charge of a lab website, we would regularly take the application down when we didn't want any applicants. So I would hope, but also that's a time thing. So Cindy, I don't know if you have any specific thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would definitely say like, what I might do, like, so if it's a fillable form as opposed to like, one that you could, print out and attach as a PDF, go ahead and put it in. And then, kind of wait like maybe a week or so. And if you didn't hear anything, you could sort of follow up and say like, oh, I filled out this on the website and, I just wanted to follow up to see if there was interest because, faculty are not always great and labs are not always great, to be perfectly honest, at keeping their websites up to date. If they're actively looking for RAs, then they're going to be better about it. But people do have a tendency sometimes to leave it open and then forget to close it. So I would say, fill out the form on the website. And then, if you haven't heard anything for like a week, I think sending an email to follow up, and just asking that question would be perfectly fine. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Great question. Okay. Alrighty. So next, so when we're thinking about the application and the resume tips, kind of going to Megan's question, if let's say we are filling out an application form directly on a website, thinking through how you're answering questions, a few big bullet points to remember. First is use very clear and simple language. A very hard lesson I had to learn when I was an undergrad, my minor was in creative writing and poetry. And man, is that a stark difference to academic writing and like how people read academic writing. So I will say that I think for people reviewing applications, like the clarity and how concise it is key. So prioritize that. Next, in your responses or even in your resume, how you're formatting it, make sure you kind of tailor the details of what experience you have to be relevant to the job posting you have. So we give you some examples here. Like if you're, maybe you tutored some in high school or something, being very specific about, I worked on these 2 projects. I had 7 students. The topics I covered were biology, social, psychology, whatever, but being very specific so that the person who's reading your application sees how that particular experience might be relevant to the work you might do in that lab or to the topic of the lab. In your resume and in your application, if they're asking about your research interests or what research questions you might have, thinking about how those research interests align with what the lab studies is a good call too. I've had a few undergrads who have applied to me because they're really interested in studying like schizophrenia or psychosis, which is nowhere in the realm of anything I do. So more, it's like, I can't give you what you're looking for. So you want to make sure that 1, the lab can give you what you're looking for and that you're being clear about that. Next, we want to make sure that we are well researched in what the lab is doing so that when you're filling out your application or formatting your resume, you can kind of align it with what the lab is doing to show the lab that like, I am a good fit for you. An important misconception is that the publications of the lab reflects their current work. That's not necessarily true. It takes a long time to do research studies. And often when people are publishing in a specific research study, that research study has been completed. Like that is done. They are probably now actively working on a new research study while writing up the results from the last research study. So what they're going to need help on is the study they're currently running, not the one that they're writing about. So then again, it becomes important for you to look at the lab website. I'll also say sometimes social media can be helpful. Some labs have social media pages, or some faculty or graduate students have Twitter pages. And if you go and find their Twitter handles, you can get a better idea of what their current work is if they're active on those social media sites. Reviewing listings. So again, like I said, making sure you're going through the websites, or like Dr. Lustig said, if you're looking at UROP, they have a list of what labs are in UROP or open to taking students. So making sure you're kind of looking through the resources you have available to you to figure out which labs have positions open, looking at lab pages. You can look up the actual PI on NIH Reporter. And then the last little tip I gave you earlier, which is to include your CV or resume in that initial expressing interest email. Okay, so those were the do's. These are the don'ts. So one big thing is just to make sure you proofread. It's really easy, especially as you start submitting a lot of emails and applications, to, if you're copying and pasting, for names to be left behind. That will make it very clear that this email was not really meant for me. So make sure you're proofreading, make sure you're making sure that like everyone's names are correct, the lab is correct. You also don't want to email too frequently. Especially if you're emailing like a faculty member or someone who gets a lot of emails, it'll just add to the influx. So I think like sending an initial express email and then probably waiting like a week or 2 before sending a follow-up and being like, hi, I haven't heard back, and just seeing if they have a response for you. You don't want to be too vague. If you just say that you love psychology or you want to do research to a lot of different labs, especially if you do go looking at that website we gave you with the list of all the psych labs, and you'll see how specific each of our research interests and areas are. Like you would be shocked that in a field like psychology, like I don't think people realize how in depth we go into our niches. So if you do just say, I love working with people, or I want to study psychology, none of us would be able to tell if we're a good fit for you because we all offer such different experiences. So you don't want to be too vague. You also don't want to talk too much about learning about things that the lab might not be covering, or suggesting that you're going to like take things far and beyond what they do. You want to stay in the limits, especially as an undergrad RA, because you're going to be supporting ongoing projects. And then another good note here is if it requires a cover letter, or even if the application asks something like, why are you interested in this field or this kind of work? You want to make sure you're not getting too personal and self-disclosing too much. You have something to add there, Cindy?
Yeah, so a couple of things I just wanted to add. So, you would think, first of all, that the, emails without the proofreading, you would think that would be a no-brainer, but I can tell you the number of emails that I have that stick an N in my last name where it does not belong is really kind of shocking. The other, and this is one where I want to, kind of strike a balance. It can be really tempting, like, especially, you're nervous, you want to make a good impression, or like maybe English isn't your first language, to rely on ChatGPT or like one of these other chatbots to do it. And I would say, like rely on something like Grammarly to help with your grammar or something like that. And again, the chatbots have gotten a little bit better, but they do have a tendency to use this sort of overly flowery, complex language. And a lot of faculty and grad students, at this point, we have sort of an allergic reaction to it. And so that's not the impression that you want to make. So I would say, if you are nervous about, kind of making that good impression, then, definitely, like, I think using something like Grammarly, or even just, Word, Google Docs, they often have a lot of grammar and spelling checkers. And then, talk to a graduate student, right? Like, there's almost certainly the case that you have a graduate student who is GSIing, or for those of you who aren't Michigan students, TAing one of your classes. And they will often be very happy to look that over. Or if you're academic, your undergraduate advising office, like they may be willing to sort of meet with you and sort of say, like, hey, here's what we've seen, be successful, and sort of give you some tips on those things. So, definitely make use of the resources, but we do want to get to know you and like hear your authentic voice. And if we feel like that's not what we're getting, that is almost going to immediately lead to somebody hitting the delete key on that. So just an extra caution now that we are in the age of AI.
Definitely. That's a very good addition there. Do you guys have any questions before we move on to like the next chunk of our slides? Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to talk, so Neem kind of talked a little bit more about, applying internally within a department, to potentially either advertised or unadvertised positions. I'm going to talk a little bit more about applying to some of the programs, if something that we were talking about before, so something like MSpice, Europe is sort of an in-between kind of thing, SROP. So some of these where it's a little bit more formal and there probably is a more extensive application process. So the applications, they'll vary a little bit in what they have. Almost all of them will ask you some kind of demographic questions, just sort of who are you? What is your background? They may ask you for a transcript. In some cases, just to make sure that, the program isn't going to be demanding, especially if it's a program that is ongoing throughout the academic year as well. They want to make sure that that research isn't taking away from, your ability to complete your classes, which is the thing that you're paying a lot of money to do. A statement of interest. This is a really important part. So they will often ask you some questions and, sort of list why you are interested in that particular lab or what kind of research you want to do. Where do you see yourself going? So whereas in the, informal application, you might just include 1 or 2 lines when you're emailing, the lab and just sort of say like, hey, I found this interesting. If you're asked to do a statement of interest, you want to research the lab a little bit more deeply. Depending on the process, sometimes you may even, contact them ahead of time and say, hey, I'm thinking about applying to your lab. And there may or may not be an interview. Again, that will depend a lot on the individual programs. For the demographics, there may be some specific characteristics. If it is a federally funded program, it usually has to be U.S. citizens. International students, those will usually be funded by more private foundations. Often, a lot of these programs are targeted at increasing diversity within a field and bringing in different perspectives. So they may ask you if you are underrepresented in the field. And that can mean a lot of things. So it's not just racial or ethnic background. It can also be, so a lot of the REUs are targeted to bring in students from rural schools. Do you have some kind of different perspective that is going to help you bring new insights potentially into research? They may ask about transfer students because, again, in many cases, if you're transferring to a larger university from a smaller school, we take that into account and try to provide those opportunities for people, or freshman or sophomore. And then in many cases, we are sort of interested in people who are going to be interested in research in the long term, because you're giving work to the lab, but the lab is often, in many cases, making a real investment in you too. They're trusting you with their research. They're spending a lot of time mentoring you. And so, there's often a hope that you will sort of end up kind of continuing the cycle and going on to graduate school yourself. It's not required, but it does often sort of give you a leg up in the application. Transcript, usually your official and unofficial transcripts are available. You can just get it if you're at Michigan through Wolverine Access. There's probably whatever institution that you're doing, there's probably just some place that you can go enter in the information and they'll email it to wherever it needs to go. And again, we're taking a look here to see, are you in good academic standing? Are you doing well in your courses? It doesn't have to be straight A's. And the other thing is, are the courses relevant? So, from my lab, if you, got a D in organic chemistry, I don't care. Right? It's just I didn't do well in OChem either. It was a tough class. But what I'm going to be looking for is, how did you do in your cognitive psych course? Because that relates to things. How did you do in your lifespan development course? How are you doing in statistics? Some programs have a minimum GPA expectation, others don't. So again, just really take a look at the expectations that they will outline on the application in most cases. Your next component is the statement of interest. And this is often really kind of like a make or break once you pass kind of the initial screens based on the numbers. And just like with the emails that Nima was talking about before, you don't want to be vague. I love all areas of psychology. I would be happy in any lab. You may think that you're being flexible, and honestly, I'm sympathetic because there are so many things that interest me that I end up collaborating with a lot of people. But, you're trying to sell yourself as being, almost an employee or a member of that particular lab. So you do want to sort of hype up why you're interested in that particular lab or that particular program. Do mention your relevant qualifications, and especially if you have any particular skills that would fit well with that lab. So if you have technical skills, I used R to analyze survey data in my Psych 101 class. Don't minimize either things that you've learned in your class, or, if you have a job, doing something where you've learned some kind of technical skills or even working with people, that can be really helpful as well. I think one of the things that got me one of my first, research positions was that my first job in college was being an office temp. And so I learned Excel really well because I could get paid more by getting better and better at Excel. And we crunch a lot of data in our labs. And so that was a really helpful skill to have. On the other hand, don't be overly altruistic. I'm destined to help people. I'm going to change the world. Nima can speak to that, but, then we start to worry a little bit about your personality disorders if you go a little too far with those things. Do demonstrate your written communication skills. Again, proofread. One of the reasons that proofreading is so important is that we are trusting you, if you're going to be a research assistant in our lab, to work with our participants to collect the data. Like that is our lifeblood. That is what makes the science work. And so we have to be sure that you are really collecting this and doing an accurate job, because otherwise the science that we're putting out into the world is not being accurate. And if you're not being careful in this application essay that that is going to be scrutinized, then people are going to worry, how careful are you going to be when you're in the room with the subject by yourself, or just entering the data on the computer and there's not somebody looking right over your shoulder. So do be very careful about that. Don't make excuses about your gaps or lack of qualifications. I don't have much experience but on the other hand, you can also be honest about the challenges that you've faced. And so what we're looking for is, we understand that people are going to be coming from different backgrounds. There's going to be different opportunities at different institutions. And so what we want to take a look and say, what have you done to make the most out of the situation that you were in? Like one of my best graduate students came from a really small school, but it was clear like she had sort of maximized every opportunity that she had there. So again, that's where, you sort of find this balance. You're not excusing the gap, but you do contextualize the resource limitations. So coming from this disadvantaged background, I wasn't familiar with this, or I haven't been able to engage in research positions because I've had to work in order to support myself. And so, here's what I did to learn more to pursue my goals. So again, you can be honest about the challenges that you face, but then just demonstrate, your interest by showing what you have done towards your goals. Some of them may require a letter of reference. Again, if we're asking you to come into our labs, we kind of would like to hear from somebody else who's worked with you, what their experience was. They should not be related to you. It should not be your uncle. It should not be your dad. They should demonstrate your social skills, maturity, motivation, and ability to work independently. In most cases, it's going to be a former instructor. It may be a volunteer or a work supervisor if you haven't had a chance to be in a research course. If you've taken a stats course, if you've taken a research methods course, those are particularly helpful to get letters of recommendation from, especially if you did well in the course. Or if you're interested, so let's say you're interested in going into MSpice because you're interested in child development. If you've taken a developmental psych course, that's a really good thing to do. But again, also don't put aside, your real world experience if you haven't had a chance to take a developmental psych course, but you have worked in a daycare or you've worked with autistic kids, then that can be getting a letter from your supervisor. In those situations can also be really helpful. So they're trying to gauge how you work rather than how you are in class. So it's not necessarily they got an A. Like, that's great, but I can look at the transcript from that. I want to hear, when we did teamwork, they were a leader, they were very responsible, they contributed well to the class. It's clear that they're really thinking about the material. Then there's the interview. If you have made it to the interview stage, congratulations, because there's usually, for many of these positions, there's often a big cut of people before you get to there. And so this can be sort of nerve-wracking, but it's also really fun because now you're actually getting to talk to the people that you are interested in working with. So practice. There are a ton of resources online. Just look up, interview questions for a research position in psychology, and you will find sheets. If you join our winter program, we'll go through this with you. Again, you may have undergraduate advisors who can also give you some advice on this. If you have a career center at your university, they're also often really happy to help you out with those sorts of things. Come prepared with questions of your own. Almost certainly the interview is going to, if it doesn't start with, so which questions do you have for me? that is going to come up at some point within the interview. And you don't want to be just sort of sitting there and giving the blank stare and being like, I don't know, man, just give me a position. That's not what we want to hear. We want to hear your questions because that shows your interest and that shows that you've really thought about the position. If you do have any weaknesses or gaps in your application, talk about how you plan to address that issue. So it may be, something where it's like, hey, I haven't had a chance to work with people from this population before, and that's something that I'm really looking forward to getting the training working with your lab. Or again, I haven't worked with this kind of software before, but I know, I have a couple weeks before the summer program starts, and I found this YouTube video, and here's how I'm planning to start to learn it so that I can really hit the ground running with the research. It's a great idea to follow up with a short thank you email. So it just doesn't have to be anything elaborate. Just, dear whoever, to the graduate student, to the PI, thank you so much for meeting with me. I really enjoyed hearing about your lab. If you can mention something specific that came up in the conversation, especially if it's something that you might end up working on. So if you say wow, I really found that experiment that you discussed on motivation and learning to be really fascinating, and I would love the opportunity to work on that. Again, that just shows that you were paying attention throughout the interview and that you're really invested in that particular lab. If you do not get a position this year, again, I'm not going to, beat around the bush here. It can be challenging, again, especially in the current funding environment. First of all, don't take it personally. Most labs are going to get a lot of applicants. As I said, we're not even looking for somebody in my lab right now, and I still end up getting 5 emails a week about it. So it's many cases, it's not about you. It's about what are the circumstances, what is the timing. The other thing is, so COVID also, if you talk to some of your professors, if they're at a research university themselves, most of them will be realistic about what the current situation is. If you're at a primarily teaching institution, the professors may not have been as in tune with how things have changed since COVID, and in the current environment. So, there is back a return, I would say, to more in-person testing than there used to be. But a lot of us got very used to, during COVID, because we had to, doing online testing. And it turns out that that's very fast and it's very convenient. And so now a lot of labs will do online testing, so there's less need for in-person testing. So again, if you can, find a way to position yourself to do online or virtual research, in some cases, this can work to your advantage too. So I've actually had students from Iraq work with me long distance because they had particular skills and they were able to do that over Zoom. So it restricts some opportunities, but it opens up some others. Research involves multiple stages and pieces, and this is something to be aware of. It's not eureka every day. Most days it is not. And you will usually sort of start off at lower levels, so doing data cleaning and analysis, maybe literature reviews to sort of help you get oriented. Often testing participants is a big one. And then, as you become more senior in the lab, you may then be able to help with some of the upper level projects and maybe even contribute to some of the writing. So, sort of, and the first one, sort of see what you can do to learn from it. If you didn't get the position, there may be many reasons. And again, in many cases, it's just the match. We are getting a lot of applications from folks. And so, there may just be somebody else who just happened to be the perfect fit. So do what you can to customize your cold email and your application essays to really demonstrate your passion for that topic and why you are the good fit. It is a balance because you don't want to be too specific in showing interest in other topics. Again, do not completely rely on ChatGPT for email drafting. The other thing is you want to show some extracurricular activities, but you don't want to have such a long list that we think you're not going to have time for the lab. Right. So it's not a competition like some people, I think, especially when they're applying for med school, they feel like they have to show that they've done 18 things. We would rather see you have like 1 or 2 things that you're really committed to and show dedication on. Not all factors are within your control, right? The lab's a capacity, no additional summer funding. It might be that they needed a bilingual RA and you happen to be bilingual. That's going to then be a factor that in some ways wasn't in your control, but worked in your favor. So, also keep in mind when you get a position, sometimes, the luck is on your side. Don't burn bridges. Professionalism and courtesy is a huge one. Even if the interview didn't go the way that you want, like don't be bitter and burn bridges afterwards and be like, I can't believe you didn't take me on. And also, even if you are in a difficult situation in your current lab or with a former employer, you want to be tactful about how you present that information. You can say, it was a difficult situation, or you can say, it just wasn't. Usually the best thing to do is just to say, like, it was not the right fit for me. Again, if you can't get direct experience in the lab, there are other ways to start getting experience. So again, I encourage you to check out that earlier workshop that we had on how to get involved in research and what to do if you can't get a position this year. In that one, we actually give the information that we gathered from many of the labs in psychology here at Michigan, asking them what skills they are looking for. And so that will really help you target your training. Some things you can do, like if you're interested in doing, academic papers, you're probably writing papers for your classes, learn how to use some of the citation managers. Because in many cases, like one of my third year students right now, she needs to write a review paper. So she's very happy to have students working with her that know how to use some of these programs that help to manage journal articles, and help her write up her citations. Data management and basic coding resources, these are huge. Most labs, especially the more, I guess I would say, sort of the more STEMmy that they are, the more likely that they're going to lean into these kinds of things. And there are just a ton of different resources for learning these. Coursera and LinkedIn Learning for SPSS, R, Python, JASP, STARS Thinking 2 is basics of RSTAT, Pi4E, learning Python. There's here, Michigan, there's CSCAR. They hold workshops on statistics and on software. There's probably something like that at your university as well. So libraries also are a good opportunity. They will often, in many cases, hold these kind of workshops to give you some basic skills. Some other opportunities, so being more specific, learning basic concepts about statistics. These are 2 particularly good YouTube channels for that. They give very good, clear explanations, and they often tend to be sort of psych relevant in the way that they frame their problems. Free or free-ish online training courses and certificates. So again, if you're here at Michigan, you actually get a subscription to LinkedIn Learning. And I always encourage people that if you do some of these online courses, to go ahead and, as long as it doesn't cost a lot of money, if you can get it free through your institution, to go ahead and complete it out to the certificate level, because anybody can put onto their CV or their resume that they watched some YouTube about something. That doesn't tell me that you actually knew it. Whereas if you have the certificate, then I can actually see, yes, this person passed some kind of test. I know what level they can operate on with this particular program. If you know about the IRB, so this is an institutional review board for those who may not be familiar. Basically, every study that we do has to get an ethics approval. It's a fair amount of paperwork that we don't love to do. And so if you can come in and say, hey, I know how to complete IRB applications, that may be very welcome news. And also, if you've completed the training, in some ways, this is sort of a way of kind of showing your research street cred, and saying like, hey, I know that this is something, knowing this ethics training, I will have to do this to be involved in your lab. I've already come into this. We're not going to have to waste a week on that. So showcase that on your resume and CV. The other thing you can do sometimes is, if it's a lab that you're like super interested in and, you talk to them and you kind of like, got good vibes from them, sometimes ask if you can join unofficially. Ask if they have a journal club or if you can sit in on their lab meetings and just say, I'm so fascinated by the research. I just want to learn about it. And in many cases, like if you show up and you're dedicated and you're, coming to the lab meetings and you're participating in them, you're not just in your phone or falling asleep, that shows us, okay, this person is really into it and they're dedicated and they're learning about it. And then when a position does come up, you're going to rise right to the top of the list. If you feel comfortable, ask the lab's PI or lab manager or grad students if they have a course or a training session. Particularly not all labs will give you specific feedback about why you weren't selected. Again, there can be many reasons, but particularly if you were a strong candidate and it was close, they might tell you, it was a really hard decision for us, but we did go with the other person because of X. Ask them if they can point you to resources and say, hey, I would like to be competitive the next time. Look for research opportunities in your department or area events. Again, here's one that we have for psychology. I don't think the new version has been posted yet, but we do in Psych have the Psychology Research and Service Learning Fair. If you're here at Michigan, you will get a lot of emails from the undergraduate student newsletter that will remind you of this. If you're not sure, go and talk to the undergrad area in your department and ask them, where should I look for things? Because the advisors can almost always tell you. Also, you can try reaching out to a different department if you think you might be interested in working with them. I've usually seen this coming from the other direction. So I had a student who was a math and stats major, and he decided that psychology and neuroscience was a really cool thing. And so he came into my lab, worked with me for a year, did an honors thesis, and now he's actually a PhD student in another lab in the department. You can also, like I have mentored students who have interests in psychology, but they weren't able to get into a psychology lab, but then they go and they work in kinesiology, or they work over in biology, or they work over in psychiatry. And then they will get a psych faculty member, such as myself, to sponsor them so that they can get the psychology independent research study credit, or they can have it listed as a psychology honors thesis. So go ahead and be creative. As Nima was saying at the beginning, psychology research is important everywhere that there are people. So be creative in how you're looking for that. The other thing, especially if you are looking beyond your own university, look for research opportunities on social media, academic Twitter /X. Some people have left that because of the person who happens to be running the company at the moment, and some of the things that he gets up to. So a lot of people who are academics have moved to Blue Sky. Blue Sky is also kind of nice. It is a smaller community, and I think some more communications between people are a little bit tighter. So a lot of times people will advertise opportunities there. Take a look at their web pages, see if they have an account, who do they follow or interact with, build your network, look for when they start to advertise positions, learn about new researchers in your topic of interest. A great way, especially for finding a position after you graduate, is looking in the fall for faculty members who've gotten their first assistant professor job, because they are just building their lab. And so now they need to find people to staff their lab. So they are often going to be hiring and advertising. On social media, you often see important papers. It'll be good just to know about those and see what is sort of interesting in the field. It's a low stakes opportunity to network. Just remember that, if you're going to have a Twitter profile, you may want to have one that's your professional one and one that's your personal one. We will Google stalk you when you're applying to the lab. So, just make sure that your social media is on point. And again, there's many posts of opportunities, RA coordinators, PhD positions, postdocs. It's just a really good way to find out early, in many cases, what positions are available. So this is just an example. Again, somebody put this together. They just spent a day sort of going through Twitter and looking for these different positions. And just in one day, they were able to find all of these. So they are out there, and eventually you will find the one that's a perfect match for you. All right. Any questions or comments from anybody?
Okay. Okay, so quickly we'll run through some common frequently asked questions that we get. One big one is when people know that they're interested in some kind of research, but not so sure in exactly which topic. Like I said, this is super common, so try not to panic. This is a normal place to start your research exploration. We went over some of this stuff earlier, but I would encourage you to reflect on your own coursework, extracurriculars, clubs that you might have done in high school, jobs that you might have gravitated towards, even if you didn't end up getting the job, what were the ones that you were applying to. Look through some listings or lab websites, see what's catching your eye. Another one we get is, can I do research outside of my department or institution? You absolutely can. And in many ways, it can be encouraged. It can show us that you are able to work in different settings and with different types of people and professionals. As long as you keep in mind that when you're doing research for credit, like Dr. Lustig said, in some cases, you might need to be sponsored by someone in your home department to get the proper research credit. So just make sure you check the department rules and talk to the undergraduate academic advisors as needed. They're really good resources. The faculty members can be accommodating across departments and institutions. So if you have interest and you're kind of willing to lay the groundwork of letting people know, hey, I'm going to do this bio lab. I need a psych faculty to sponsor me. This is what it would entail. Are you okay with that? Most of the time, faculty members will be quite accommodating with that. When is a good time to start? It's good to start early, but it's also never too late to start. People, like I said, there's no perfect way of getting to graduate school, to research experiences. So follow whatever path you're on. If you are earlier on, though, it's a great time to start looking and exploring. It's also possible and actually quite common to continue research after graduating, especially if you're interested in pursuing graduate school eventually. Most of the STARS mentors have taken gap years, and a lot of those gap years are post-bac research years where they get more research experience. The timing is there's never a perfect formula for timing. What matters more is your passion, your commitment to whatever you're researching or to research in general. That's usually what speaks through the CV, the application, the statements, is the passion and the interest that you have. Next, what can you actually get from doing research if you don't want to stay in academia? There are a surprising amount of jobs that open up for you when you have some research experience. One, the skills are very transferable. So the things that you learn doing research are going to be valuable across the job market, not just in research-related fields, not just in academia. And it's also important to be careful and thoughtful with how you're phrasing your experiences in your resume. For example, if you're applying for a more manager-based position, it might be important to highlight in your CV how you managed a team of RAs when you were a senior RA. But if you're applying for a more data science-y position, you might talk about that research lab experience more in terms of what coding you learned, what data you managed, how you managed it. So you can highlight different skills based on what you're applying for. Okay, so we'll end off on this. Remember, there's no two paths that are alike. There's no formula for doing it. If it were easy, truly everyone would do it. Take your time, explore your interests, get involved where you can. And we are, of course, here to help you guys. So feel free to shoot us an email if you have any questions or if you have any feedback for us. But that'll wrap us up for today. So thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next time.
All right. Thanks everybody for spending your time with us tonight. Have a great night.